I first shared my basic sourdough recipe here on TikTok a little over a year ago, and since then so many of you have adopted this to be your recipe as well. So I figured it was about time we get an updated start to finish in-depth recipe. These measurements make 2 loaves of bread, so if you only want one, half them and follow the same timeline. Start off by weighing out 300 grams of your active and peaked sourdough starter. Next, you're going to add 700 grams of water, room temperature or slightly above, and whisk that together until it forms a nice frothy and milky consistency. Now when it comes to flour, this recipe calls for 1,000 grams of a high-protein bread flour such as King Arthur. However, you can get creative with swapping out some of the overall flour for a heartier wheat such as whole wheat or a freshly milled flour. I typically like to swap out anywhere from 10 to 15% of the total weight. For me personally, I've found that that's the right amount to add some nice flavor without affecting the final crumb too much. As for the salt, you can either add it in now and mix it with all the ingredients, or if you're slightly more advanced or wanting to try out some more advanced techniques, you can wait to add your salt when we do the first stretch and fold. By waiting to add the salt, you're doing a sort of faux autolyse and allowing the flour time to hydrate, as well as some of the gluten bonds to begin forming before the salt can interfere with that process. Once our dough is thoroughly mixed and it's formed a nice shaggy consistency, you're going to cover your dough and you're going to leave it to rest for 1 hour. Now that our dough has rested, it's time to go ahead and add our salt and begin the first round of stretch and folds. I'm adding 20 grams of sea salt along with a little splash of water just to help get that salt beginning dissolving and help it incorporate a little bit better into the dough. To incorporate the salt, I like to dimple it into the dough before going ahead and performing my stretch and folds while giving it a gentle massage in between each round until I feel like it's fully incorporated and really worked into my dough evenly. At this point, I'm going to cover my bowl again and leave it for another hour before coming back to perform the next round of strengthening. Especially when making more than 1 loaf of bread at a time, I prefer to do coil folds for my second and third rounds of strengthening, but you can totally do stretch and folds here if that's more your jam. Once we finish that second round, we're going to cover it up again for another hour, and then we're going to do a third and final round of strengthening. Like I said, I'm doing coil folds here, but you could totally be doing stretch and folds as well. Now we're going to cover the bowl up and leave it to complete its bulk fermentation on the counter. The timer on bulk fermentation begins as soon as the salt is added and should probably take about 6 to 8 hours on average. However, during the cooler months, this could take closer to 10 hours total. Dump your dough out onto a lightly floured surface and divide it into 2. I like to just eyeball this, but if you want to measure it and be precise, they should be about 1,000 grams each. Now it's time for the pre-shaping. Regardless of what final shape you want to make your bread, you do the pre-shaping the same. Do a letter fold on your dough and then roll it over itself and work it into a nice tight ball. At this point, we're going to cover the dough and leave it to do its bench rest. This should take about 20 minutes or so. All you're looking for at this stage is for the gluten to relax back down so that we can work up that tension again into our final shape. The final shaping, if you're making a boule, is going to be the same as that pre-shaping. Perform a letter fold and then roll it on over itself and get it into a nice tight ball, and then you're going to put it into its floured proofing basket and allow it to do the final rise. When shaping a batard for the final shaping, you start it the same with the letter fold, but then for the final turn and roll, you're going to want to try to work some tension and get it into a nice tight spiral so it ends up as a log at the end as opposed to a round circle. Pinch the sides closed and then transfer it into its floured proofing basket and leave this to do the final rise as well. I like to do an overnight cold proof, but if you want to bake the same day, you could do 30 to 60 minutes on the counter and then go ahead and bake. When it's time to bake, preheat your oven with your bread oven or Dutch oven inside to 450 degrees and then dump your bread out and score it. I like to give a little dusting of semolina onto the bottom of my loaves to keep them from sticking to my pan. Bake for 20 minutes with the lid on and then remove the lid and lower the temperature to 400 degrees and bake for an additional 35 to 40 minutes. You could leave the second loaf in the fridge for an additional 24 hours and bake the next day, or if you're baking back to back, I like to put my bread oven back into the oven while I preheat back up to 450 degrees and then dump my bread and repeat the same process as I did for the first loaf. 450 degrees with the lid on for 20 minutes, lid off, lower it to 400 degrees and a final 35 to 40 minutes, and there you have it, 2 of the most beautiful, perfect, delicious sourdough loaves. Being able to share this recipe and seeing so many of you having such success with it brings me more joy than you could even imagine. Being able to share my knowledge and passion with all of you is truly a dream come true. I also absolutely love seeing all your creations, so don't forget to tag me if you try this one out.